Hi everyone. So we are going to talk about the process of cellular respiration today. Cellular respiration is the process that your body and all living things use in order to get energy. And we're going to call that energy ATP. ATP molecules are going to be what gets made in order for your body to have energy. And like I said, this happens in all living things. And all living things continually need energy, so that means they're continually doing this process of cellular respiration and they are continually making these ATP molecules. So let's go ahead and learn about it. So a lot of students make the mistake of thinking that cellular respiration and breathing are the same thing. They actually are not. Breathing is simply the process of organisms getting oxygen into their body so that they can do the process of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is what we're focusing on. Cellular respiration is actually the process of your body taking the oxygen and taking other molecules and making the energy that is needed to kind of run everything that's necessary. So we're focusing on cellular respiration. Yes, oxygen goes into cellular respiration for most organisms, including you, but that's not the same as breathing. What we're focusing on is actually looking at how do we make the energy, and that is called cellular respiration. All right, so let's get started and take a look at these chemical pathways. So, food for humans is basically the raw material that provides all of the energy for your bodies to function. And so your cells are going to use the food that you make to make new molecules. And what's important is that those new molecules, those are called ATP. It stands for adenosine triphosphate, but we can just go ahead and abbreviate it as ATP. Those molecules are going to give the energy, that's what's important to be made for your body to carry out all the life processes necessary for your body to function. And so what we need to know is, how does this process work? So in the presence of oxygen, when oxygen is present, we're going to call this an aerobic process. So these two words, these are connected, oxygen and aerobic. So in the presence of oxygen, that means that we're going to have the process of glycolysis occur. And that process, you can see in the image right here, here's glycolysis. If oxygen is present, then we're going to get two more steps. The first step is the Krebs cycle, which we can see right here. And the second step is the electron transport chain, which we can see right here. So when oxygen is present, we're going to have all three steps happen. We're going to have glycolysis. That is actually the process that happens without the oxygen. Then the Krebs cycle is going to happen with oxygen, and the electron transport chain is going to happen with oxygen. And from this image, you can even start to see how we've got ATP being made, which is that energy molecule that gets made from all of these processes. So, all three combined, all three of these steps together make up cellular respiration. So glycolysis right here, that one does not require oxygen. We don't need oxygen for it. But these two processes are called aerobic. And the reason they're called aerobic is because they need oxygen in order to occur. And so during the process, we can see ATP is being made. And what's really happening is we are getting energy by taking our food molecules and we're breaking them down when oxygen is present. So you can see our three steps. Step one is glycolysis, which requires no oxygen. Step two is the Krebs cycle, and step three is the electron transport chain. So let's talk about this first step, glycolysis. Glycolysis, you need to know where the process occurs at, and you need to fill in your notes that glycolysis is taking place in the cytoplasm that is outside of the mitochondria. So this is not happening in the mitochondria. It's actually happening kind of outside in that jelly-like cytoplasm material. The other thing besides where glycolysis occurs that you need to know is you need to know that it does not require oxygen and that it's the first step of our overall process of cellular respiration. There are technically a whole lot of complicated steps here for the production of ATP in glycolysis. It is very, very complicated. You do not need to know all of this. You need to know what I said on the previous slide. But if you do continue in science, you will have to learn all of this, especially if you take AP biology. The next two steps do require oxygen, and so they're called aerobic. And so requiring oxygen is going to mean that they are going to make more energy. And so these two processes, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, they are going to take place in the mitochondria. And in the mitochondria, they are going to be making lots and lots of energy. So you need to fill in your notes that this occurs in the mitochondria. You need to fill in that this requires oxygen. It is aerobic. And the mitochondria, remember, we have learned, is the powerhouse of the cell. And the reason it's called that is because this is where the process that makes the most energy is going to occur in. Well, these two processes that we just talked about, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, both of them are very complicated. The Krebs cycle, you can see we've got pyruvic acid going in, and we've got all these things, NADH coming out, ATP coming out, all of these things. Very, very complicated. What you need to know is that that first step is called the Krebs cycle. So there are two steps to that aerobic respiration, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. You don't need to know all the steps, but what you do need to know, besides the Krebs cycle being that first step of that aerobic respiration, is that one of the waste products is that carbon dioxide is being exhaled. That's being removed. That is a product, but it is a waste product of this process. The important part of this first step of the Krebs cycle is the ATP. And what is ATP? ATP is high energy material. And what it does is it's used for all your different cellular activities. It's from everything from making your heart beat to holding the pen or pencil in your hand, to anything that your body needs to do. And so ATP is the key. And there are also high energy electrons that are also used to help make even more ATP when there is oxygen present. So these are the important things that you need to know. You don't need to know this complicated steps here. You need to know the products of the Krebs cycle are going to have carbon dioxide being exhaled. ATP is going to be used for all those cellular activities, and that lots of high energy electrons can make more ATP when there is oxygen present. Then we get to the next step, the electron transport chain. And again, super complicated biology. Again, a whole process where a bunch of things go in and go out. You don't need to know that complications of that. But what's important is that we're getting lots and lots of ATP, which is the energy for your body, for your cells to do all the different things that they need to do. All right, so let's review everything that we've gone over so far. First thing is there are 3 different stages to the process of cellular respiration. And those 3 different stages are going to include glycolysis. That's the first step, that is anaerobic. Then we have the Krebs cycle. And then after that, we have the electron transport chain. Now remember that glycolysis, being the first step in the process of cellular respiration, is going to be taking place in the cytoplasm of the cell. The next step, the Krebs cycle, is going to happen in the mitochondria. Now remember, the glycolysis does not require oxygen, so that is going to be an anaerobic process. whereas that next step is going to be in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. So after glycolysis, we next have the Krebs cycle. And the Krebs cycle is going to require oxygen, and it is going to take place in the mitochondria. The mitochondria is that powerhouse of the cell, which means that the next two steps, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, are going to be where the majority of the energy is made. And remember, energy, our batteries are kind of called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You just need to remember ATP, the majority of it is made during the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, and that those two steps happen in the mitochondria and require oxygen, whereas the first step, glycolysis, does not require oxygen. So make yourself a note on the side that these two steps, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain happening in the mitochondria, are going to require oxygen. And remember that when we require oxygen, it is called aerobic respiration. The anaerobic stage of cellular respiration, which means that it does not require oxygen, that stage is going to be the glycolysis section. So make yourself a note that the anaerobic, no oxygen, is glycolysis. And remember that happens in the cytoplasm. Now there are two different types of cellular respiration that do not require oxygen, and those are called fermentation. You've got lactic acid fermentation as well as alcoholic fermentation. Now, the lactic acid fermentation is the type of fermentation that happens within your cells. And that's actually what makes your muscles sore, is the lactic acid that builds up when there is that lack of oxygen. Remember, this is anaerobic, no oxygen. Alcoholic fermentation is usually done by things like yeast and bacteria when oxygen is not present, and that produces alcohol. That's why it's called alcoholic fermentation. So those are the two types of anaerobic, no oxygen processes that are going to occur within cells. So take a minute, make sure that you have all of the notes written down, including that lactic acid fermentation is what makes your muscles sore. It's actually the buildup of that acid that makes your muscles sore. That's why you should stretch and rub your muscles. Remember, fermentation, these are processes of anaerobic respiration, meaning that there is no oxygen required during those processes.